Let's just go ahead and dive right into it. We have a brand new set of Any Given Saturday top 25 power ratings. Now, I want to make this emphasis on the power ratings, and the main reason why I wanted to go ahead and do that because I want to make this very notable distinction, okay? This is not how I would go about ranking these teams for, say, a college football playoff, for example. This is not how I would go about ranking these teams. All that this power rating model is and what this represents is if you have two teams on a neutral side field and you have them on that same field today, how who would be favored over whom? This is what these power ratings are supposed to solve. This is what these power ratings give that type of insight into. So if you're not really into that type of thing, you might want to go ahead and move to later on in the podcast. I do have this pre-recorded. This is not like a live stream kind of thing, and you probably wouldn't be interested in that. So you probably want to go ahead and move over to when I talk about some game recaps, which, by the way, if you want me to give my opinion on how I should think like the college football playoff should be ranking these teams, go ahead and let me know down in the comment section. And, depending on what kind of feedback I get on that front, I will certainly go ahead and do that in a later podcast. But that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to dive in like Trey Songz as we go. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up from there, 25 through 21. I'm going to show you what this top 25 is, starting from 25 to 21. This is what the 21 through 25 rankings look like in this new Any Given Saturday power rating model. Now, there is one notable distinction here in this top 25, and that is Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a team that did end up falling pretty significantly, actually. They did come in ranked number 19 in the country in terms of the Any Given Saturday power ratings, and things did change. Things can certainly change on a dime, and that was a perfect case. We had Ole Miss an opportunity to kind of spoil Georgia's chances to go ahead and go out and not only put themselves firm in that college football playoff conversation, but also to stop Georgia from clinching the SEC East. Here was happening in the SEC East going into this last weekend that we just had. Georgia was up by a couple of games on Tennessee. So on the surface, it seems like things were pretty locked down. However, a Tennessee win and a Georgia loss would have mean that the game this upcoming weekend and a game that we will preview later on this week, what that means is that, okay, that is actually not the case. We actually have a game that does need to be played, right? So that being said, Ole Miss did have that opportunity, and for the first quarter and a half, it actually was a game that really was competitive. However, Ole Miss dropped the ball here. Ole Miss definitely dropped the ball pretty considerably. They got flabbergasted. They got bamboozled. They just had their pants down, especially in that second half. Georgia dominated this Ole Miss squad, and that's somewhat of a reflection. While Georgia is, certainly playing one of its best ball that we have seen Georgia play this year, coincidentally, on the other side, Ole Miss, maybe some hard questions that maybe need to be asked. They're not too far away from being maybe an elite program, so to speak, but you can't ignore the fact that Ole Miss got absolutely drugged. So we penalized them heavily in the power rating model. And that's why we did end up moving them down 5 spots, down to number 5. And then you see the rest of the list. You got Clemson at 23, Louisville at 22, and Iowa at 21. Okay, cool. Now we jump into this top 20, and there's certainly a lot to unpack here in this top 20, so a little bit more time will be spent here in this portion of the Any Given Saturday power ratings. We'll start down at the bottom. We're going to start at Auburn at number 20. So Auburn is back in. They were unranked last week. However, Auburn been playing some pretty good ball, led by Hugh Freeze. Remember how controversial a hire that is? Well, year number 1 for Hugh Freeze has actually been a moderate success. This is going to be the first time that Auburn is going to be bowl eligible since 2019, and they do so in emphatic fashion, drubbing Arkansas. They beat Arkansas. They were an underdog against Arkansas, a minor underdog, like a 2.5-point underdog right before kickoff, but an underdog, so to speak. And not only did they find a way to pull off a minor upset in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but coincidentally, what Auburn was able to do was, well, they absolutely embarrassed the Arkansas Razorbacks. Sam Pittman and his guys are down horrendous, but even though Hugh Freeze maybe doesn't have his guys, so to speak, yet, majority are from the last regime, he's still found a way to win games. And with a game against New Mexico State coming up, they have an opportunity to win the most games that they've won since 2019 and have a very good season. Who knows? Maybe they can give Alabama a little bit of a run for their money. We're not sure yet. We haven't taken a look at Auburn's schedule yet, but we will possibly do that, as that might be a game that we preview later on. Again, you're going to have to stick around and wait. Tennessee, on the other hand, Tennessee was very disappointing. We had them borderline as a top 10 team. We no longer have that belief after what happened to Missouri. We thought that Tennessee was going to win an outright cover, but, well, actually, no. The model did believe this, but we actually believed that Missouri was going to find a way to pull this upset off, and they actually did. So, pat on the back for your boy for getting that right. You love to see it. But at the same time, though, Tennessee got their kicked, right? It was not looking good for Tennessee. Missouri essentially out Tennessee. That's really what happened in this particular game. And Tennessee had a chance to possibly come out and, put yourselves in a situation to where that Georgia game becomes an all the marbles type of deal where you're fighting for an SEC East championship, and they didn't know what was going to happen in that Georgia game. They actually played multiple hours before that Georgia game. So the Tennessee Volunteers, they had everything to play for. There was no reason to have a letdown. Yet here they are, barbecue on the titties. They do have a letdown here. So they fall significantly in our power rating model. We had them at number 11 last week. They're down here at number 19. Conversely, Missouri, this was also a moment where the model had to give Missouri its flowers. For the entirety of the season, Missouri was not ranked in this top 25. You have not seen them because the base rating for Missouri was not that great. It kind of underestimated Missouri over the course of this season. So while Missouri was actually involved in the college football playoff hunt until so much as a couple of weeks ago, the model was never really sold on the Missouri Tigers. That's changed here after that dominating performance for Tennessee. Finally, we get Missouri in here, ranked for the very first time here in the regular season. Only took 12 weeks to make it happen, but hey, better late than never. Missouri is here ranked number 17 in the country. And then Texas A&M. There's a lot happening with Texas A&M right now. I think we can all agree on that. Texas A&M, we have them up to number 16. Now, this was before the announcement that was made Sunday morning that Texas A&M did end up deciding to fire their head coach and Jimbo Fisher. And listen, I can applaud Texas A&M for making the decision quickly in that, okay, they realize that Jimbo Fisher is not going to be the guy for Texas A&M. I truly do, but I've always felt like the timing was a little bit weird because they did this after not just a win, but a dominating win. So what that tells me is that this was decided well before Texas A&M took the field on Saturday. But going to what Texas A&M was able to accomplish on the field in Jimbo Fisher's last game, Texas A&M looked really good. They dominated Mississippi State. I think they did that on the road too. So Texas A&M moves up 5 spots. They're up to number 16. Whoever gets that Texas A&M job next season is going to have a ton of resources to work with. Not only a fan base that has the money and the facilities, but they also have one of the best talent rosters in the country. If that next head coach can find a way to keep a lot of that talent on the roster, because now with Jimbo Fisher being fired, it now allows for any Texas A&M football player to enter the transfer portal. That is an exception made, and we saw this play out with the Northwestern situation at the beginning of the season. So definitely something to watch out for. I don't have a pinpoint on who should be the next coach of Texas A&M, but it's certainly that I want to explore either later this week or next week, depending on what kind of time constraints that we're working with. Now, we'll go ahead, jump into the top 15. This is what the top 15 is looking like. Washington and Utah actually do have the exact same power rating. It is literally the exact same following what happened, because we expected Utah to cover against Washington, and we were right. It ended up being that one possession game. Utah did lose. Washington found a way to gut one out in Seattle, but we actually thought that the model thought that this was only going to be a field goal game, not a touchdown game. So Washington got a little bit of a bump because of that, even though they didn't cover the spread, so to speak, officially, according to FanDuel. Again, these two teams have the exact same power rating, but since we just had a game on the field, Washington beat Utah. That's why Washington is ahead of Utah. Oregon State. Oregon State up 5 spots to number 12 in the country. Oh boy, did Oregon State. They looked really good in their game this past weekend. Oregon State took on Stanford, and Stanford has been a tricky team to some degree, but Oregon State was simply not faced. They blew out Stanford 62-17, and I feel like they're hosting Washington. It has major college football playoff implications, at least for Washington, and Pac-12 conference implications for both teams. And yet they decide to go to James Madison. ESPN decides to go to James Madison for the College Game Day. It just feels a little sketchy, considering ESPN, let's be honest, did have a role in terms of breaking up the Pac-12 conference. I feel like it should, even though James Madison definitely deserves the attention. They've done everything that they need to do to be ranked and be considered by the college football playoff. That's a story for another time. But Oregon State is playing some excellent football right now, and it's going to be a challenge on it. Oregon State is going to be quite the challenge for Washington this upcoming weekend. It's going to be an absolute problem. We'll see how Washington handles it, because it could get a little hairy very quickly. Now, we'll go and jump into the top 10 now. One notable change here in the top 10. We have a high riser in the Georgia Bulldogs, which Georgia has looked pretty vulnerable in the early portions of the season, almost losing to Auburn, almost losing to South Carolina. Missouri gave them quite the fight as well, but you give a team like Georgia, who has won 2 national championships in a row, by the way. They still have the longest winning streak in the NCAA at the present moment. Programs and teams built like Georgia that have the caliber of talent that Georgia has with an elite coaching staff, they're able to avoid those early season lumps, avoid that big loss or those 2 big losses. They'll find a way to get better as the season progresses. And Georgia is a perfect example of that. They're playing their best football at the right time right now. We still can't avoid what they did in the early part of the season. That's the thing with these power ratings. It talks to the whole body of work, but Georgia is playing some excellent football right now. I don't see them losing in the regular season. That even includes that Tennessee game. Again, we'll preview that later this week, but we do have Georgia up 5 spots to number 7. And then we're going to wrap things up with the top 5. We got Alabama at number 5, for example. Don't they look scary right now? Ain't nobody trying to play Alabama. Kansas State, probably the best 3-loss team in the entire country. I don't think anyone really wants to play Kansas State. Ohio State handled their business against Michigan State. Oregon was fine against USC, but they didn't cover against USC. But Michigan, without their head coach and Jim Harbaugh, he was suspended before the NCAA even completes his investigation. Listen, is there a possibility, a distinct possibility that Michigan did something wrong? Absolutely. I certainly don't dismiss that by any means. But I said this before, I'll say that again. I would have rather at least seen the investigation completely play out before any punishment was handed down. We don't get that, unfortunately, but Michigan is able to pull it out. They beat Penn State on the road, making Penn State have a little bit of a midline crisis with James Franklin. So Michigan is back to being the #1 team in these Any Given Saturday power ratings. They'll have a battle in a couple of weeks against Ohio State, but you'll have to worry about Maryland as well. Maryland is not a bad team either, and they're certainly not a complete pushover as well. So that is going to complete the Any Given Saturday top 25. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Do I think I have some teams too high, too low? Let me know down in that comment section. I love a good discourse. And you know what we say about the model. We're always going to ride with it. Great week for the model, by the way. 45-19 in terms of betting on games straight up. 34-30 against the spread in week number 11. So it wins more than loses some, even though it might be a little bit crazy in terms of how you could have this team above that team when they play on the field. Like, I know it seems crazy, but hey, if it's not broken, why fix it? And so far the model's been working pretty well, especially in this later portion of the season.